Good afternoon. Standing room only. Can I remove this?
Yes.
Okay, my name is Harcus. I'm the executive director of Minnesota Norml with a state affiliate of the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. We're a nonprofit, member-based advocacy organization. Our mission is to repeal Minnesota's marijuana prohibition laws so that responsible adult use is no longer subject to penalty. In other words, we want to end the senseless failed criminalization of cannabis consumers, and we'd like to establish a legalized, regulated, and reasonably taxed cannabis industry. Jeff invited me here today, and I appreciate all of his efforts. I don't have a well-scripted speech for you. I just wanted to come and have a conversation, so I'm just going to speak to you about my experience getting into this movement, tell you a little bit about what Minnesota Norml is doing, and how we can legalize cannabis in Minnesota. So, I'm from North Minneapolis. I drove 90 miles to get here, and I appreciate everyone who's here. If you're alive, say yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Give thanks for that. So I'm 36 years old. I'm a father. I'm a husband. I'm a community organizer. I'm a writer. I'm a social entrepreneur. And I've been a nonprofit advocate since about 2003. I am a cannabis consumer. I've been smoking myself since 20 years old, so about 16 years now. And for me, I smoke. It has helped me to manage my stress, and I think that it's a relatively healthy social drug. So I don't have anything against alcohol, but it's dangerous. It kills a lot of people. 6 Americans die every day from alcohol poisoning. About 85,000 Americans die a year from a preventable premature alcohol-related death. Over 400,000 die from tobacco-related deaths. An American dies every 19 minutes from a prescription drug overdose, but no one in the history of humankind has ever died from smoking cannabis. I think the war on drugs has been an abject failure. We've arrested over 10 million Americans since the so-called war on drugs began. Cannabis was originally legal in this country. It was illegal when alcohol was illegal. And if anyone has studied the history of alcohol prohibition, it failed miserably. Fostered a lot of crime. It led to a lot of deaths. And it just was a terrible public policy. And so, let's see. I think Minnesota Norml exists because our founding board member, who was a wealthy businessman who smoked for like 20 years, and it helped him control anxiety and depression, and deal with some PTSD. He was raided by police in Savage, Minnesota. He had 12 police officers running his house with guns pointing at him and screaming over him having a few ounces of weed. And that's a terrible, terrible waste of taxpayer money, and they're not focusing on real crime. In this country, 50% of the violent crimes and 80% of the property crimes go unsolved. And our law enforcement are forced, because of these terrible drug policies, to focus way too much time on nonviolent, generally victimless crimes. In America, 50% of all the drug arrests in America are for cannabis. In Minnesota, in 2013, it was 60%. So if we legalize cannabis, then there will no longer be justification for funding this so-called drug war, which is really a war against the people. And with 90% of the arrests being for people who are just consumers, just for possession, it's just a distraction from the real crimes. But myself, I grew up in Minneapolis, and I'm not a criminal. I don't have a criminal record, but I've been treated like a criminal. So cannabis helped me to deal with a lot of the oppression that I experienced growing up in the city, where I've been pulled over 62 times 14 of those towns may have been justified, but 48 of those towns, it's called racial profiling. And I was also assaulted one time. So when I started smoking cannabis, it helped me to deal with that a lot. It helped me to manage my stress. And I don't suffer from severe depression, but whenever I've experienced it, relatively mildly, it's treated me very well. So I speak as a consumer, and I speak as an activist. I've worked on a variety of social justice issues related to housing and employment and public contracting, a variety of social justice issues. And I never knew that I was going to get involved in the so-called war on drugs until last year. A friend of mine introduced me to Minnesota Norml, and I was very excited because honestly I've been creeping around since I was 20, to purchase cannabis and to consume it in the privacy of my home, feeling like I'm committing a crime. And when Colorado and Washington states legalized it, I was very excited. I said, whoa, maybe we can come out of the closet. And actually I was, I'm kind of an entrepreneur, so I was thinking maybe I'll move out to one of these free states where the cannabis consumers and get in the industry. But an opportunity arose with Minnesota Norml for me to get a job and to help to end this failed war against cannabis here. So that's what I'm doing. I do have connections in some of those legal states, and eventually I will get in the industry, but I want to stick around here in my home state to try to end the war. Because in 2013, Minnesota spent about $140 million to arrest nearly 12,000 Minnesotans. And again, 88% for possession. Let's see. So where are we at today? 23 states have legalized medical marijuana, including Minnesota. Although, unfortunately, Minnesota has one of the most restrictive medical marijuana programs in the country. It's you almost have to be dying to be a qualifying patient. So at this point, there's only a market for about 5,000 people who may be eligible. Although nationwide, there's about 15% of the people admit, keyword is admit to smoking. So if you calculate the figures here, that means there's at least 250,000 Minnesotans who are creeping around feeling like criminals for consuming this very health beneficial drug. I'm sorry, I went all over the place. I just want to tell you what I know, what I've learned, what I'm experiencing in this work, and then we can open it up for a discussion. So, yeah. About half of all Americans, living Americans, have tried it once. About 30 million Americans smoke it. And so just imagine if every one of them had a felonious amount. In some states, a gram is a felony. In Minnesota, we're a so-called decrim state, yet still 12,000 people are getting arrested. Where if you have less than 42.5 grams, which is about 1.5 ounces, maybe like the weight of a light potato, it's considered a petty misdemeanor. But if you have any form of concentrates, like the oils or the wax, the stuff that the state is going to start allowing their manufacturers to sell July 1st, that's a felony. So, yeah. This Minnesota Norml was founded 4 years ago, and they mostly did a lot of public education work, going to different events, holding a bunch of meetings, inviting speakers. But that's not going to legalize cannabis in Minnesota. We need to build a statewide grassroots movement. If anyone is familiar with how they did it in Colorado or Washington or Oregon or Alaska or Washington, D.C., they had to build up social movements. And we're at this point now where a lot of people feel it's inevitable because we have 4 states in D.C. where it's legal for recreational purposes. But it's not, because in all those states, the citizens had to take the action. They had to form. We don't live in one of those states where you can do that, but those are called initiative states, where if the citizens gather enough signatures for an issue, they can put that question on the ballot and have the voters decide on the issue. So that's what happened in those states, but we don't have that situation here, so it's going to be a little more difficult for us. And so Minnesota Norml started hiring staff last year, and that's where I came on mid-June. And so we're actually creating organizing plans and advocacy plans. We're actually doing lobbying, because that's how we have to do it here. We have to go to our 201 state legislators and try to find out how ignorant they are, because there's a lot of ignorance about these issues. A lot of people, especially older people, grew up with a lot of propaganda from the government where they think that, you know, if you smoke weed, you're going to lose your mind and, you know, commit acts of violence and things like that. But it's not true. Excuse me. I've been a little ill lately. Please bear with me. But I just want to say that, you know, this is a civil liberty issue. It's the government really shouldn't tell people that they can or cannot consume this natural plant. It's very natural. No one ever dies from it. And so it's a civil liberty issue at base. It's a health justice issue. I've been amazed since I started this job last summer. I mean, half the people that write us or come up to our booths or show up at our office to our meetings, they come in presenting some type of medical issue. I mean, a wide variety of issues. And so I've learned since I started this job that, you know, there's over 200 medically therapeutic benefits. For instance, veterans of military veterans, there's no big pharma drug out there that can effectively treat PTSD. But a lot of our members, a lot of our supporters of this cause have told us that cannabis is the only thing that can kind of regulate that for them. And then it goes on and on. Diseases like Lyme disease are well treated by it. I mean, the list could go on and on. I won't exhaust that. It's also, as I said, a racial justice issue. And so nationwide, despite relatively equal usage rates, there's a disparity in marijuana arrests where 4 African Americans are being arrested for every 1 European American. So the laws, the drug laws are not enforced or prosecuted fairly. And in Minnesota, we have one of the worst disparities statewide, where it's 8 to 1. So we're like twice as bad as the nation. And then in Minneapolis, where I live, it gets even worse. The American Civil Liberties Union, they produced a report called Marijuana Arrests in Black and White, and they reported that between the years 2004 and 2012, the arrest disparity between black and white, again, with relatively equal usage rates, was 11 to 1. So we literally have a bad situation here, particularly in the metro area. And I just want to, so that issue of race is kind of controversial, because as you might know, there's a lot of social segregation. So there's a lot of white people and a lot of black people that don't know any white people or black people. And then when, I'm just going to be real with you, when I talk about this, the racial justice aspect of it, a lot of people don't want to hear that. They don't want to talk about it. But, you know, I'm a truth teller, I'm a radical, and so I'm going to do it anyway. But I just want to caveat that by saying that white people are definitely arrested every day. I mean, most of the calls we get in our office are white people from greater Minnesota or the suburbs who are getting arrested for this. So it does affect us all, although some communities are catching the brunt of it. It's also a law enforcement, this is my language, law enforcement integrity, accountability, and effectiveness issue. I kind of touched on that before, but if they're spending most of their time trying to enforce, you know, win an unwinnable drug war, then that means they're neglecting the real crimes. That's why, at least in Minneapolis, sometimes it'll take a few hours for them to report to a burglary call. They're out, you know, wasting their time. In Minnesota, it costs about $11,000 on average to arrest someone for marijuana. And even if you're not convicted or incarcerated long term, that can cost you opportunities for jobs, for housing, for access to financial aid, for higher education, and some forms of public assistance. So the crime, it's not really a crime, but the punishment definitely doesn't fit the crime. So if anyone's paid attention to Colorado, we found out that the sky didn't fall when they legalized it. I was there. That's a picture of me in my first dispensary visit. Felt like a kid in a candy store. And I do, so Minnesota Norml doesn't advocate for people to start smoking. We just acknowledge that millions of Americans do. Hundreds of thousands of Minnesotans do. No one should be criminalized for it. But Full legalization of cannabis will be very good for the economy. In Colorado, they generated so much tax revenue that, well, within their state constitution, if they collect so much taxes, they have to give some back. So, I mean, that's not a bad problem, is it? And it's created like more than 10,000 jobs. It's reduced the arrests for these nonviolent offenses by like 25,000 a year. And yeah, lots of jobs, lots of tax money, lots of saved taxpayer money on useless enforcement. So it's a good thing. And I mean, I could go on and on. The majority of Americans are in favor of it. And we recently did a public opinion poll in January, mid-January, because we wanted to find out where Minnesotans stand on this. So we commissioned an organization based in North Carolina called the Public Policy Polling Company. In 2012, they were rated as one of the most accurate polling companies. So we went with someone reliable. And what we found, I mean, I admit the questions were longer, so I tried to pare it down. But when we asked, so we surveyed 811 Minnesotans all throughout the state, very equal, like 50% greater Minnesota, 25% Twin Cities suburbs, 25% Minneapolis-St. Paul. So 49% of Minnesotans are in favor of full legalization, like they have in Colorado. 44% are in favor of continued prohibition, and 7% are not sure. So being down in Minneapolis-St. Paul, we have access to a lot of the state legislators, because that's where they all gather at the Capitol. And a lot of them have told us that they don't think Minnesota is ready. I mean, you might agree with Minnesota is like one of the most conservative liberal states, or vice versa. So there's this sentiment at the Capitol that we're not ready. We're not out there like the East or the West Coast. And there's some truth to that. But in fact, our numbers are similar to national polling numbers. The latest nationwide poll was done by a think tank called Third Way, late 2014. And their numbers were 50% in favor. Here we are at 49, so we're not doing too bad. And then the question, do you think Minnesotans should be allowed to consume medical marijuana or not? 76% are in favor, 19% are opposed, and 4% don't know. So again, these numbers are similar to national numbers. In that Third Way poll that I referenced, 78% of the nation is in favor. So we're very close. And before I go on to the next few questions, there's something called the marijuana middle. Those are people, Americans, Minnesotans, who favor medical marijuana for that recreational use. And so those are the people, I'll talk about that a little later, who we need to, if you're in favor of full legalization, those are the people you need to talk to. And this question, you can blame me. I was trying to pare it down, but I don't think I phrased it very well. I'm abbreviating question. But the question is, do you think we'd be safer, and do you think police would be more effective if they didn't have to waste resources enforcing marijuana prohibition? And again, 60% of all drug arrests in Minnesota for so 46%, a majority, thinks that we would be safer and police could do a better job if they didn't have to waste their time arresting people for weed. 40% said no, because they don't know better, but we can educate them. And 14% were unsure. The next question, do you believe marijuana prohibition is working more effectively than alcohol prohibition? And I admit some of these questions were somewhat leading in trying to like introduce a little education, or just to find out how ignorant people are about certain issues and what type of messages might be most resonating with people. So a lot of people clearly don't know how bad alcohol prohibition was, because 26% of people think marijuana prohibition is working better. It's not. 10 million Americans have been arrested for it, and the supply, neither the supply nor the demand has been decreased. And the streets are not safer. 54% said no. So the majority of people know that marijuana prohibition is failing. And then 20% were not sure. The next question, do you think politicians should decide who can legally use marijuana or let the people decide for themselves? 1/3 of Minnesotans, 35% said politicians should decide. I disagree strongly. 52% said the people should decide, and 12% said they were unsure. So I kind of came up with this question, not to explicitly talk about like a constitutional amendment campaign, but kind of, see what people, if people are feeling that way, and I'll explain that in a second. Well, let me explain it now. So, unlike Colorado, Washington, Oregon, and Alaska, we're not an initiative state. You can't gather a bunch of signatures and put the question on the ballot for legalization. But our state legislature can put a question on the ballot for a constitutional amendment. And the process works like this, where if 50% plus one of our state legislators agree to put the question to the people, they can do that. And they can put this in a bill, and even if the governor vetoed it, they had that 50% plus one, so there's 134 reps. So if we had 68 reps and 67 senators, so 34 senators. So if we had that many of our state legislators support an act letting the people decide, then we could get that opportunity. So that might be one of our strategies to get this done sooner or later. The next question, do you believe Minnesota's economy would benefit from the thousands of jobs? Yes, literally thousands of jobs would be created. Politicians like to talk about how they want to create jobs. And the millions of dollars, in tax revenue that a fully legalized, regulated, and taxed cannabis industry creates. So again, a majority, 51%, do think that full legalization would be good for the economy. 41% don't know what's going on in Colorado, so they don't know that it would be. And then 8% are unsure. Yeah, so those are the results of our poll, and we have the full poll with a very thorough demographic breakdown. It breaks down who's more in favor by race, by age, by region of the state, by political affiliation. So if you're interested in all those social science things, I can give you access to that. What else? So, yeah. So we're trying, of the 201 state legislators, there's only 5 of them who have indicated that they're in favor of full legalization. There's 1 Republican senator and 4 House representatives. And all of the House representatives are women, so the women are leading on this at the legislature. But none of them are ready to introduce some legislation. So we'd like to believe that it might get down the traditional route where a legislator introduces a bill, moves through the committees, works its way through the committee process, and I don't know how much people know, but there has to be a companion bill. So if it's introduced on the House side, there has to be a similar one introduced on the Senate side. They work their way through the House and the Senate committees, and if they pass all of that, they'll meet in what's called a conference committee. That's where both sides, both bodies of the legislature meet, and they try to work out the differences and compromise. So with our medical marijuana bill that was passed last session, the worst in the country, literally, the Senate bill would have been a whole lot better. It would have allowed people to smoke the flowers. It would have been so restrictive. We would have had a lot more dispensaries. But what happened was there were 4 law enforcement lobby groups who dominated the legislation, and we have a governor who is reefer mad. He's a prohibitionist. He wasn't going for it. The only way he would, there was a lot of pressure from citizens, and so that helped to get a bill passed. So, it is a little bit of progress, not much. It's very bad. I don't want to dwell on that. But Governor Dayton is really not on our side with this. If you're for full legalization, Governor Dayton, it needs to be pressured very intensely, consistently. Otherwise, we'll need a new governor if we want to see this pass a traditional route through the legislature. So some of us, myself included, think that a constitutional amendment campaign may be our best hope anytime soon. So there's a lot I could talk about, but Congress in Well, first, let's back up a little bit. So the Obama administration, they've taken this hands-off approach to deal with the recreational, in those 4 states, the recreational industry. And Eric Holder's Justice Department is also like hands-off. But the development happened in December 2014 in Congress. They had this omnibus budget passed, and they effectively defunded the Department of Justice, which houses the DEA, Drug Enforcement Agency. So they're no longer going to be able to go raid all of these medical marijuana dispensaries and go out some the medical marijuana states. So that's some progress. And also in December, in the same bill in Congress, they indicated to Native American reservations that if their tribal councils agree to it, if the reservation supports it, that they'll now be allowed to grow and sell cannabis on the reservations. There's a lot more questions that are unanswered, but that actually gives me a lot of hope because, let's face it, if Red Lake Reservation starts growing and selling cannabis, that's going to expedite the rest of the state doing it because people are going to say, well, they're doing it, why can't we do it? It's benefiting their little local economy, why don't we improve the rest of the state's economy? So I'm actually, the Red Lake Reservation up in northwestern Minnesota, their tribal council did approve of this. They're going to do a feasibility study, they're doing some informational meetings this month, and I'm going to be traveling up there with a few of my colleagues to encourage them, including a friend of mine he's about to be the first PhD student in cannabis genetics at the U of M. So we're going to go up there and talk politics and organizing and economic development and, really encourage them to get that going. And we also got a call from our White Earth Reservation too, so that's also another. So, yeah, Minnesota Norml's trying to form chapters all over the state. We have a few in Bemidji and Brainerd and Duluth and Rochester. So we'd love to have one here at Minnesota State University. This is the first college I've come to speak at. And so if you'd like to form a chapter here, I'd be glad to help you.